What's up, everyone? Chris back again with episode 23 of What Could Have Been in Wrestling. This time we're going back to 2007 and we're going to take a look at what could have been if Mr. Kennedy didn't have that misdiagnosed torn tricep and was able to successfully cash in his Money in the Bank contract. So let's start off right at Wrestlemania 23, where Mr. Kennedy was able to retrieve the briefcase and was Mr. Money in the Bank. After that victory, Kennedy would come out week after week on Raw, and he would declare that he was going to cash in his Money in the Bank contract the very next year, and he was going to wait until WrestleMania 24 it would have been. And he actually did have a countdown. He would say something like, 315 days, etc. And I think they really wanted you to think he was going to wait that long. Unfortunately for him, he had gotten injured, I guess, on a house show, and they thought it was a fully torn tricep where he'd need surgery, and he'd be out like 6 months. So instead, after doing a promo on Raw, even though he was a member of SmackDown at the time, he then has a backstage segment with Edge, where Edge mocks him for walking around with the briefcase but not wanting to cash in. Challenges Kennedy to put up the briefcase one-on-one. He goes Kennedy into accepting, and Kennedy shows signs of a face turn, saying he's going to beat him because he's confident in his ability, and if Edge wanted a shot, all he had to do was ask. When Kennedy comes out for the match, Edge attacks him from behind, beating him up on the outside before the match starts, and hitting him with a monitor. So Mr. Kennedy is pretty softened up now before the match even begins. The ref then tells Mr. Kennedy, hey, we don't have to do this. But Mr. Kennedy says, ring the bell, let's do it. He gets up, gets sphered immediately, and gets pinned. So Edge now has the Money in the Bank contract. And then after the match, Edge then assaults Mr. Kennedy to add injury to insult and nails him twice with the briefcase. And again, you have Jim Ross and the King putting over Mr. Kennedy for having the toughness to go into a match after being attacked when he didn't have to. So again, signs of a face turn were starting, but at the same time, the thought was Mr. Kennedy was going to be out for 6 months. During this time, then, Edge, after a steel cage match between Batista and the world champion, The Undertaker, he then cashes in on The Undertaker after The Undertaker was laid out by Mark Henry. And I think Undertaker actually had legit torn his bicep and needed surgery, so he was going to be out for a while. And Edge becomes the new world champion after sphering The Undertaker. It was then realized at this time that Mr. Kennedy's tricep injury was misdiagnosed, and it was just a very large hematoma. It wasn't a tear, and Kennedy only needed to be out for a few weeks. So, if WWE had just been a little bit more diligent and maybe let Mr. Kennedy get himself checked out individually, they could have avoided all of this. So in my opinion, what could have happened then is, say Mr. Kennedy's able to hang on to the briefcase because his injury is not misdiagnosed. Because again, then he's only out for a few weeks, so he can still have the briefcase and he'd still be on SmackDown to cut promos. At that time, with The Undertaker being out because of his, I believe, bicep injury, instead of losing to Edge, they can honestly just hold off on the cash-in. And the world title can still get held up. And you can have a world title match due to The Undertaker's injury, between Mark Henry, the one who attacked The Undertaker originally, and Batista, so they can renew their rivalry from a year ago. Batista can then be the one in a match, they can even do it right on that SmackDown, who beats Mark Henry and wins the World Heavyweight title. So he gets it back after losing it to The Undertaker at WrestleMania that year. Afterwards, what you can do then is, especially if it's a couple weeks, in terms of the timeline, I know that Kennedy had already lost the briefcase, so the couple weeks would have passed already, with Kennedy's injury probably healing up pretty closely to the time Edge cashed in on The Undertaker. So again, around that same time, you can maybe wait, like I said, a couple weeks just for Kennedy to heal while he cuts promos. Batista, like I said, after he wins the world title, he can get attacked by the Great Khali. And the Great Khali can give him the tree slam, leave him laying. And then you can have Mr. Kennedy come out with the briefcase. And he can be the one, obviously, who cashes in. And this time, he pins Batista, and he becomes the new World Heavyweight Champion. So that could still be around May of that time. Going into Vengeance that year. So instead of it being Edge, you can have it, obviously, you can have Batista now chasing for the World Heavyweight title, which I believe Kennedy said was going to be the plan, where eventually he was going to drop it to Batista after winning it, but they wanted Batista to chase him for the belt for a while. And this is actually where I think it could be interesting, because, like I said, Kennedy had already been pushed as a pretty big deal. He had his feud with The Undertaker, and obviously they actually had him get the better of him in a couple segments where he busted The Undertaker open. And also, he also had already been the U.S. champion. So he was definitely being built up to be a pretty big star, in my opinion. While he also has Batista he's fending off, who he can have actually as his first challenger at Vengeance would be probably Kane, looking at how things played out. Kane, obviously, being his first challenger would be a safe way to go, because he's a credible challenger, but he's someone that you know deep down is not going to beat Kennedy for the title, so Kennedy is going to win his first program while defending his newly won belt. And again, as fate would have it, I think this is another reason Kennedy should have been able to hold on to the briefcase, is because after Edge did cash in and win the World Heavyweight title, he started a feud with Kane, and in one of the segments, when Kane attacked him, Edge actually tore his pectoral muscle, and then he was forced to relinquish the World Heavyweight title. He came in on SmackDown and basically had to give it up to Teddy Long, and he had to do that whole guaranteeing that he'd be back and he'd get his title back. And then they did a battle royal that same night. And at this time, Mr. Kennedy had already recovered. So from, again, the misdiagnosis, and had already recovered from what was just the hematoma on his arm. And he could have won the battle royal and won the world title. So as fate would have it, he had a couple chances to win it. But instead, of course, they went with the Great Khali. And I believe this was actually in the summer, actually. This had gone into, I believe, July of that time. So maybe he could have won it a little bit later. And I know he had been drafted to Raw that summer, but they could have had him switch back very easily. So there were definitely still opportunities to put the belt on Mr. Kennedy, so it's very surprising to me that they didn't. So in this situation, as champion, Mr. Kennedy, of course, beats Kane, retains the World Heavyweight title. And then we head into the June pay-per-view, Great American Bash. Now, here's where things actually would take a little bit of a downturn for Kennedy's title run. Because I think the idea would be that he would hold it for a bit. But in June, obviously, of that year of 2007, that incident, I don't mean to say incident, I'm sorry. The tragedy and double murder with Chris Benoit happened. And Vince McMahon had to cancel and turn away all the fans for that 3-hour Raw. It was going to be the conclusion of the Mr. McMahon death storyline when on Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night, some weeks before, he left the arena, and when he got into his limo blew up and it caught fire. And I remember on WWE.com when they had the image of the limo up in flames, it said, the headline was, "Chairman assumed dead." Vince McMahon then came out on that Raw after the Chris Benoit tragedy with the Benoit family. He talked about how in reality Chris Benoit was dead, and so was his son and wife. And of course, everyone remembers the bad publicity that was shed on WWE at the time. So just a few weeks later, going into Great American Bash, I know they had purposely main evented babyface versus babyface title match for the WWE title when Cena took on Bobby Lashley. And I think they wanted to do that to have a more positive, basically move things into a positive light. So that's why it was a babyface main eventing against a babyface. And obviously, I think they just wanted to do something different to get people talking so they weren't talking about the Benoit situation. So with this pay-per-view, since both Raw and SmackDown were represented on it, I think Batista actually would beat Mr. Kennedy in this case. And he would become the new World Heavyweight Champion. And I think because of the Benoit double murder situation and suicide, Mr. Kennedy's title reign would be cut short. Another reason I think it might be cut short as well is because, like I said, during that June, he was also drafted over to Raw. And when he made his first appearance on Raw, Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross were, calling him a huge pickup for Raw, and Jerry Lawler referred to him as the draft pick. So really putting him over strong. And before the Benoit situation in tragedy, Mr. Kennedy came out, cut a promo dedicating this promo and what he was going to do in his career to the life of Vincent Kennedy McMahon. So a hint right there, obviously, because he stressed the Kennedy with it being his last name and Vince's middle name. Now, while the title reign might have ended, I still think they still had very big plans for him, because after Vince showed up back on TV, and did his best to explain the supposed explosion in his limo and his supposed death, he then exits the building. The Raw he returns when they tried to move on from the Benoit tragedy, and he leaves in the same manner like he left the night his limo exploded on McMahon Appreciation Night. He's about to get into his limo. They try to have the same kind of scene, walking through the arena, and then looking back, and then walking and opening up his limo door. And before he can, Jonathan Coachman comes and tells him he's being subpoenaed, and he's being sued because he has a child that he had out of wedlock, and it's a child he never knew about. So then they had to shift the storyline to who's Vince McMahon's illegitimate son. And then Stephanie comes out in the next Raw and informs Vince that his unknown son or daughter is one of the superstars around the ring. Vince has a look at everybody, and when he leaves the ring, him and Mr. Kennedy meet face to face and have just basically a brief meeting where they just look at each other, stare at each other, and Vince walks back up the ramp. Now, let me just say, Mr. Kennedy was supposed to be named the illegitimate son of Vince, so they clearly had big plans for him still. And I still think he could have had a title reign, this time for maybe the WWE title. And he could have been the one winning the Royal Rumble that year. However, before that storyline of Vince McMahon's unknown son could come to fruition, there was a pharmacy scandal where I believe 11 wrestlers got suspended for picking up illegal prescription steroids or non-prescriptive steroids. And I know Carlito and Umaga were on that list because they were written off TV for 30 days. But unfortunately, and this time by his own undoing, Mr. Kennedy was on that list, and he was also written off TV. So, a week before the reveal, Mr. Kennedy had actually come out to Raw and told Vince that there's a reason we locked eyes after you left the ring. There's a reason why Raw next week, when your son is revealed, is taking place in my hometown of Green Bay, Wisconsin. And it's because I'm your son. A doctor comes out, talked about he looked over the forensics and did a biological match, and it is not Mr. Kennedy. That is not his son. So that storyline got scrapped because Mr. Kennedy had to be suspended for 30 days. So unfortunately, this time his bad luck was from his own bad decisions. So going forward from there, I know obviously they went with comedy, and Hornswoggle was revealed as Vince's, basically revealed as his illegitimate son, much to the laughter of Triple H. So instead of having it where Kennedy could have seen his career skyrocket, and he could have still rebounded from that non-Money in the Bank cash-in, really, Kennedy's career then really went nowhere because he, missed his chance with the misdiagnosed injury, and then, of course, the 30-day suspension put a halt to big plans they had for him. After that, I know when he came back, he faced John Cena on a Raw, and John Cena, I think tore his pec, and that was in October of 2007, off, I think it was like a hip toss Mr. Kennedy did. And even though there was nothing wrong with it, it looked like, people still were blaming Mr. Kennedy for that injury. So that hurt his standing, injuring the top star in the company. And then he really just floundered on Raw for a better part of a year. Got injured again. And then when he came back on Raw from, I believe, an injury still as a baby, because he had done a face turn in 2008. When he came back as a face in 2009, he told Randy Orton he was the fifth man in a 10-man tag against him with Legacy and others that night. And Randy Orton must not have had something against him, because off of what was, deemed as a botched back suplex, where Randy landed on the back of his head, he visibly lost his temper in the match. And the day after that Raw, in 2009 now, Mr. Kennedy was let go from the WWE and never returned. He, of course, did pop up in TNA in 2010 when Hogan took over, but he was never able to reach that level of success that I think a lot of people thought that he would have. And I think the level of success the WWE had been planning for him before, obviously, a lot of bad luck went his way. So unfortunately, due to bad circumstances, again, like I said, the misdiagnosed injury, and then, of course, like I said, the Benoit double murder-suicide, I think that timing was not on the guy's side. And even if he had won the world title, he wouldn't have been able to keep it that long because WWE wanted to have positive spins on storylines to move away from a lot of the bad press they were getting. And I don't think that with his move to Raw, his title reign on SmackDown would have lasted too long. And then, of course, like I said, the wellness violation was his own issue. So that's going to really wrap it up. I know it doesn't cover a very long time frame, but like I said, due to circumstances and the timing of when they were trying to push him, a lot of things worked against him, and nothing really broke his way after winning that Money in the Bank. So really, we're just that really covers it there. And like I said, I think that I think because of the wellness violation, I think he still would have found himself, because I know, just looking back at SummerSlam, he was in a triple threat match for the Intercontinental title, and that was SummerSlam of 2007 that year that he didn't win. So really, right off the bat, instead of being in a world title picture still, he's competing for a mid-card title in that triple threat match where Umaga was the champion. So there just wasn't too much to be said about him because of circumstances. Not all his fault, but some of it was, obviously. And I just think that even if he got his world title run, it just wasn't destined to be a long one. So that's where I'm going to wrap it up. If you want me to try to expand on that, maybe talk about what would have happened if he didn't have that wellness violation and was revealed to be Vince McMahon's illegitimate son, please let me know. I want to say a special thank you to Donnie Brooks, who sent in this question and sent in this topic. I definitely appreciate it. It was definitely a very interesting one to look back on, and it really makes you wonder what could have been with Mr. Kennedy's career, because he's a guy I think they saw a lot in originally when he debuted in 2005, and a guy who had a lot of potential. So let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Let me know if you think that his title reign, if you think it could have gone differently, even with the Benoit tragedy happening. Let me know, obviously, any other topics you'd like me to talk about. And let me know if you actually think that Mr. Kennedy, could have even been WWE champion on Raw if things had broke differently with the Vince McMahon storyline. And if he could have maybe even won the 2008 Royal Rumble that year. So again, special thanks again to Donnie Brooks. Thank you to everyone for your topic suggestions. I definitely see them all, and I'll be getting to all of them. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and appreciate everyone's feedback. Thanks a lot, guys.